for a matter of litigation. After that, we'll go to citizens' input for anything that is not on the agenda. If anyone cares to address the board. Seeing none, we'll move to the approval of the minutes for the June 15th, 2020 Board of Supervisors regular meeting.
I, Laura, move to approve.
Patty, second.
Okay, a motion by Laura, second by Patty. Any corrections or changes? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is a COVID-19 response report from the manager.
Thank you. I have very little to report this evening. Essentially, operations at the township are continuing as they have been over the last couple of weeks. Today marks the first day where all staff has reported back to the township building, and the temporary remote work assignments that were approved in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic have essentially expired. So we have staff back in the office full time. We're going to continue to remain closed to the public, but we are going to reevaluate that decision in this coming week and then determine whether we are able to safely reopen either with full hours or modified hours, and an announcement on that decision will be forthcoming as well. The township hosted a virtual town hall last week, so on behalf of our staff here, I want to thank everybody who was able to attend that meeting. We did have a few attendees, and the questions that we received were good. They largely focused on the reopening of public facilities like our municipal parks, playgrounds, public restrooms, etc. So it was a pretty brief webinar. We updated attendees on not only municipal operations, but regional and countywide response efforts. So that's, again, appreciated for all those who attended that. And then lastly, we received the responses and closed the survey that we distributed to our authorities board and commission members, designed to kind of gauge any concerns or issues they've experienced while responding to this pandemic and hosting their meetings in a virtual environment. And the responses, as we expected, were fairly mixed, meaning some people that were in attendance were comfortable engaging and participating in the meeting in a virtual environment, and others were looking forward to a return to in-person meetings and being able to attend and participate in the more traditional sense. So I think our marching orders for the time being are going to be to continue to offer both options for the public as well as authority board and commission members to take advantage of, depending on what their level of comfort is. If you want to attend in person, you're welcome to do so. If you want to continue to participate virtually, you can do that as well. We'll continue to make that option available for this foreseeable future. We're working on some technical issues, I think, with CNET to cover this hybrid meeting format, but pending how tonight goes and any minor adjustments that we need to make in response, I think we will be in good shape. That's all that I have. Again, I just want to close by thanking everybody for your patience and your understanding and cooperation with our staff throughout the response to this pandemic. Really are appreciative of everybody's understanding and willingness to kind of let us go through this recovery with you all, and as we reconstitute our municipal operations, for your understanding throughout. So thank you again, and if there's any questions, I can answer them. Otherwise, that concludes my report.
Okay, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Dave. That is great to hear that everybody is back and working in the office. I just had a couple of things. One thing that I wanted to just make sure that I mentioned is that the CARES Act assistance for rent and mortgages opened up today, and that can be applied for via the county. And I was wondering if we could get a link up for that. And then for small business grants, I think there's still a few days left for this wave of assistance. And I can send you that link as well if we could maybe get that up. I think there's probably 4 or 5 days left to apply for those grants. And then I did just want to ask, I wasn't sure with what regularity the managers are still meeting. And with that, I was wondering if there's been any talk of, or has there been any data collection regarding food security, housing, or employment? Do we have any ideas of where the food bank is at with assistance? Or I know that the school district and YMCA meals are being heavily used. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's been any information sharing on that, and if there is, if maybe at a future meeting you can fill us in, or if we can start to kind of gather that stuff. One thing I was thinking about is as the students come back in, I know there's always a food security issue with college students. A lot of them have, accessed the Lion Food Pantry, and I thought that might put some more pressures on the community too. So I just kind of wanted us to get a hold of where we're at right now.
It's a good point. I have sort of anecdotal information, but probably nothing that would be meaningful to share tonight. The managers are still meeting weekly with the Center Region Emergency Management Coordinator and the county administrator, so we still have some dialogue that's open. I think we're moving to a less regular meeting schedule. We had been meeting twice per week, but I think we're paring that down as we, kind of move into, I guess the next phase of recovery. But I can try to compile some maybe more meaningful information that might be available either through some of the human services agencies that are operating in the township and in the county, but also maybe through this group as well, and see what we have that we can provide that might be useful.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any other questions for Dave or comments on the code? Okay. Next item on the agenda then is a staff report, the procurement code amendment.
Thank you. Just wanted to follow up on a discussion that the board had at the last meeting on June 15th. There was a request from Mr. Mitra to consider an amendment to the township's procurement code that would stipulate that contractors whose anticipated contract amount is above $10,000 but below the prevailing wage threshold, in other words, below the threshold where prevailing wage law would apply, the requirement would be that those contractors would certify that they pay their employees a minimum of $15 per hour for the work performed on the job. There's some discussion amongst the board, and where the board left it was directing staff to conduct kind of an informal survey of some of the contractors that we commonly do business with, either through just the normal course, meaning maintenance of municipal systems and infrastructure, to things that are very costly on a yearly basis but are not required to follow prevailing wage law. So that would be primarily line striping of our roads and micro-surfacing of our streets. So Dave Modricker, Public Works Director, prepared a matrix based on his, again, informal survey results. They were included with the agenda packet. There were 7 contractors that were surveyed whose work ranged from maintenance of the township's HVAC system all the way up to microsurfacing, which is over $100,000 per year, but because of the type of work it is, isn't obligated under Prevailing Wage Act. And the responses from those firms are included with the agenda. There was only one of the 7 who indicated that there would be an effect on their contracted amount if they were required to pay a minimum of $15 per hour. And there's actually a general estimate of what that impact would look like. So I think of the contractors that we surveyed, there would be maybe a negligible impact on, if any, on their ability to provide the services, largely because all but one of them are already paying at or above that $15 per hour threshold. There is a motion that's in the agenda packet that's based on the original recommended motion that was included in the June 15th agenda, but of course, it's up to the board to decide how that you want to proceed. Dave Modriger's not here tonight. He's out on vacation this week, but I can answer any questions the board may have. I'm pretty familiar with his survey process and what the line of questioning involved.
Thanks, Dave. I guess with this, we can either start with the motion and then have discussion, or discuss what we want to do and then decide on a motion at that point. So I'll open it up to either a motion or start the discussion.
I mean, we can start the discussion and then see what consensus exists and then go with the motion.
Sounds good. Did you want to start then? This was your item. And
Yes, so, so I would be in sort of favor of the motion, as in the other things that I would also like in the discussion to be discussed, and if it is ruled not germane, we can sort of have another discussion later on. But I think whether we want the township itself to pay for 15 an hour or more for our regular employees, of the full-time regular employees. And in this case, I think it sets, to me, the positives are on the balance more than the negatives, and we can get into what the paperwork requirements and how much the overhead of doing this is. So I would be in support of this motion.
anyone else at this point? Well, I would have a question, I guess, for Percentage, since you brought this in, is why the $15 an hour? I mean, we have the only one that was paying less than 15 was paying 14. I guess, is there a rationale for 15 as opposed to some other number, 14 or 18 or whatever?
Yeah. So to be honest, I tried to look up for a sort of living wages and then divided by whatever number, and I did not find good data for this area. So it is a guess, and I would also, if we can, in the motion, or as we can take it up as an additional item, perhaps index it to inflation, and that it'll go up every so many years at this rate. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't have a good answer as to why 15, not 16, or not 14, or, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was just wondering if there was something that you were referencing or, a particular source or something. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Laura.
Thanks. So thanks to Dave Modricker for doing that survey and giving us some data. That was really helpful. So the way I'm reading this, it doesn't seem like there's a very large impact if we were to do something like this. Would you all agree with that statement or no? I mean, impact negative. It doesn't seem like there's a large negative impact. Would you all agree with that, or?
Well, I would agree that there's not a large negative impact in terms of finances, but I would ask Dave, is there a negative impact in terms of the township, staff for processing?
Yeah.
Since I think the positive impact is fairly small, so,
Right.
Well,
Correct.
I think negative is kind of a value judgment, but I would say that there is additional, depending on the language of the ordinance. I mean, what I would expect we would do is collect payroll certifying that employees on the job were in fact, compensated that minimum of $15 an hour. We do that right now as a matter of course with our prevailing wage contracts. Those certified payrolls are submitted regularly, reviewed by the township engineer, and then filed for spot checks, which we conduct from time to time, meaning we'll, in fact, confirm in the field that an employee has been receiving that level of compensation, but they're also subject to audit by the Department of Labor. So we probably wouldn't be audited on anything that we're not regulated by prevailing wage law, but given that it's an ordinance of the township, I would anticipate that we would require some continued certification, primarily to avoid, well, certainly for the one hand to administer the ordinance appropriately, but also to avoid any conflicts or allegations of impropriety with respect to the awarding of township contracts. Meaning, if I am a bidder and I just check a box that says, yes, I'll pay, and then my bid gets selected over another contractor who may have bid lower, but was unable to certify that, and the only, difference, frankly, was that they checked or didn't check that box, that may, if there's not accompanying that a requirement that the contractor submit certified wage payrolls confirming that they paid that minimum wage, I could see how that could be potentially concerning for the township and exposing for the township if, the other contractor, the unsuccessful bidder, were to say, well, look, I didn't check the box, but how do you know that other, that the successful bidder is actually paying what they claim to? So there would be additional administrative, oversight on the part of the township, because we would have to be collecting payrolls and confirming that they're indeed meeting that requirement, that bid specification.
And for, for one particular contract, like how many hours of work would it be, or what, sort of any, from your experience?
Well, it could really range from, less than an hour of work and with respect to our backflow inspection, and you could see that's about a, $500 annual contract, or preventative maintenance for our heating system, depending on, what the size of that maintenance looks like. I mean, there's years where they come out once or twice just for routine checks, and there's years that we have significant replacements that need to be, funded and installed. So, and it could also, on the high end, microsurfacing is typically a project that spans several weeks, many man hours, many person hours, and you might be talking about several pay periods, the span of a couple of months, where we would be collecting those payrolls and reviewing them for compliance. So it's kind of dependent on the specific contract.
The other comment that I had to make about the 15 an hour is, and that's after, so the origins is the sort of national dialogue at 15 an hour, which started at 15 an hour at a long time ago, and other places have gone about that. But given that State College, well, on the national scheme of things, Ferguson isn't a very expensive place, and the survey sort of bears out that it will pull up perhaps one contractor. The other one is paying $15.32 plus benefits, and yeah, so I mean, if you put it above that, then there'll be more of an impact than that. So, I mean, I'm okay with 15 to start with at this point.
Anything else? Lisa?
Thanks for doing this research to Dave. I guess it was all Dave Modricker who worked on that. So I appreciate that because it was difficult to have the conversation kind of not knowing the numbers that we were working with. So this is really helpful, and it's encouraging to see that these were the wages that were already being paid. I think one of my concerns had been initially was that we would find that maybe there was a local company that was paying, say, $13.50 or something an hour, and they'd be excluded from a contract where maybe they're hiring local people, and $13.50 an hour is a decent wage here, whereas you have somebody who's, I don't want to call any one of these groups out because I'm not sure where they're coming from, but you have maybe an out-of-town group living in a more metropolitan area with a higher cost of living, and they're paying their employees $15, which is not really adequate where they're coming from. So if that line of reasoning makes any sense. That was one of my concerns, was it wasn't really equitable when you break it all down. So anyways, this does help me. I think one of my other concerns was that, you know, we had talked really briefly last time about hourly employees at the township and at COG and Percentage. This is going back to your point of kind of, you know, also secondarily taking a look at those groups and making sure those hourly employees are being paid sufficiently, and how those salaries are figured out, how they're all scaled. So I would really prefer at this point, for me, I would prefer to start with that than to move directly to this. I'm just still concerned about this, maybe, you know, excluding some that groups or organizations that don't need to be excluded, some companies, because this was just a snapshot of those who applied to this. I'm hesitant right at this moment. But I'm still with you in the spirit of trying to get people to a decent livable wage. So I do want to keep exploring this. I'm not sure I'm ready to move forward with this particular arrangement of this right now.
I can say that all full-time employees of the township and most part-time employees, I believe the only exception to the part-time is the mechanic's assistant. That is a temporary seasonal hire, typically in conjunction with some of the trade schools for their mechanics programs, are paid a minimum of $15 an hour. I can't speak for the COG, but I can speak for the township.
Right, thank you. Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
that.
Yeah, and so Dave, can I share my screen, please? Is that?
Yeah, I think I can enable that. Okay, you should be good now.
So, yeah, right, and 1 second, sharing my screen. And so to answer Steve's question, the one site that I saw had some number, and this is State College. We can consider Ferguson to be pretty close, if you can see. And I can send this to Dave for inclusion if we need to. So these are sort of the numbers that, this is from MIT Living Wage Calculator, which keeps it current, as of sort of last year. So this is saying that January 1 of the coming year, so that means January 1 of this year. But these are the numbers, and it says, okay, the first line is living wage, poverty wage, and minimum wage. And this is sort of what we have. And so if you have 2 children, then 15 is not enough. If you want to peg it to 1 child, then 1352. If you want to peg it somewhere in between, that's 15. So this is what are the numbers that I sort of looked up, and then they give you the calculations as how they broke this up and got those numbers. So yeah, I'm not wedded to 15 per se, but you know, where do we draw the line? And then that other person is giving benefits, so how do we calculate that? Is the other question. Yeah. So that is the add-on, right, information.
It's just, my question basically, was there a reference you were using, so that,
Yeah, it was roughly an adult and 1.5 child, but
okay.
yeah, we could do it 2 children or something. Yeah. Right.
Okay. All right.
Well, I'm not opposed to doing something like this, but I also would agree with Lisa that I'm more interested in looking at COG, and then just having, like, Dave, I trust you, but just having a formal look at our whatever, just to double check that. So I would be more interested in doing something like that. I think primarily because it seems like we are mostly hitting the general target for a living wage in terms of per survey. And I think, I'm afraid that the overhead, staff overhead is gonna be like a little burdensome. But again, I'm also not opposed to it, so if others felt like, you know, it's worth it, let's give it a try, I wouldn't be opposed to giving it a try. Is that as
Yeah,
non-specific as possible?
Yeah, I mean, the other option would be to table this and then deal with whether we and COG are paying minimum wage,
Yeah.
and if we want to also decide on how we want to index it for inflation, do all that work, and then come back with a better version. I'm sort of fine with that. If
I
that's
like that idea a lot. Continuing our work, but maybe a little bit of a different question first.
Do you have anything, Patty, or?
No, I basically agree with what Laura and Lisa said. It just sort of feels like a big task right now, and there's some other issues we should explore first.
Yeah, I would wonder, I think, I don't see from the survey at least, where I think there's enough benefit to take on, you know, the paperwork for staff. I was wondering, is there anything we can do, like with our bidding documents, to encourage like a $15 minimum or something? Not that we're, you know, not say we're gonna monitor it, but that we support that as a standard and would encourage any contractors to, you know, consider that, or I don't know if there's a wording that would make sense for that or not, but.
Well, generally, I like the idea of the township as a whole supporting living wages for people. So I think that anywhere we can be sending that message, that's a really good message to send.
Yeah, and initially I had started with the conversations with Dave, saying that can we just say that, you know, if you are paying living wages, we will consider it as sort of one of the factors for our selection. But he said that will create. So Dave, you want to comment on that? That would create issues and challenges and things like that. So can we hear the logic there a little bit?
Sure. I think my concern about having guidelines in whether they be, you know, ordained in our procurement code, or whether they just be sort of position statements that the board chooses to make, that aren't really cemented in, you know, kind of objective review, has the potential to open us up to challenges. I would say that probably among the most common complaints that I'm asked to adjudicate as manager is, you know, concerns that our bidding process is not handled in a fair and objective way. Now, that's never been the case, that at least in my tenure, and I think going back before me as well, where those complaints have been founded. But, you know, contractors are very sensitive to how those bids are managed. And if there's a perception of inequity in how the awards are made, you know, just understandably so, they will question, you know, what happened or why they didn't get selected over another firm who maybe had a higher bid but was a qualified bid, or was an unqualified bid, meaning they put everything in the specifications that we've asked them for, versus them who maybe had a lower bid but was qualified, meaning they might have changed some of the specifications. A good example of this And a real example, frankly, is our tree planting contract, where we've had one bidder who was the low bid, but wasn't able to find all of the species that we specified in our document. We had another contractor who was the second low and was able to find all of those documents. The board awarded to the unqualified bid, the second low. So, but in that case, we had a very, reasoned, objective, specification to reference. And I'm concerned that if we put something that doesn't have that kind of, maybe objectivity to it, then we're opening ourselves up to a potential challenge. In other words, if we were to say, well, look, we just want you to check a box and we'll consider it, not only does that leave us open to challenge, but it's also very difficult for staff to be able to formulate a cogent recommendation on a contract award to the board. In other words, we won't be sure whether we're going to recommend one contractor over another simply because they have either, checked that box or didn't check that box, if there's not a clearly established standard, against which to weigh these responses. So I'm just a little bit concerned about our ability to administer something that isn't very well defined by ordinance, or that we don't have the intention to, in this case, collect certified payrolls to ensure compliance with.
Okay, so it sounds like that might complicate things more than just requiring it.
I think it has the potential to, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So even if we, in practice, do not use it, but if we mention that living wages are encouraged, are recommended or encouraged or something, and that would be, people would assume that, you're saying that people may assume that we are denying them because of that thing, and that will create more challenges. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate for one concern, and then the second concern would be from, staff's perspective, which is, what does it mean for us when preparing our recommendations to you all for a contract award if we are not clear on whether they're obligated to or just encouraged to, and what does it mean for our enforcement of that provision? So, generally, I'm not a big proponent of regulations that aren't clear enough that we can enforce them. I understand there's some need for, ambiguity, because you can't necessarily, as elected officials, visualize all potential outcomes of an ordinance or a regulation that you enact. So sometimes you want to kind of find that fine line between, being too specific so that you leave other things slip through the cracks, but also being too general that you don't, kind of achieve your intent and your purpose for your ordinance. So, that's the kind of line that I would suggest you consider as you're directing us to proceed with this ordinance amendment. So, and it has to be clear to, myself and to my staff as they're putting these bids out and answering questions about specifications, because if we put a bid document out on the street, we commonly get calls asking for clarification, and I would expect that one of the most common calls that we'll get is, you asked me to check a box here that says, or maybe you put in your bid document, you encourage the paying of $15 an hour minimum. What does that mean? And without a clear way to respond to that, I think that puts us in a difficult position.
Yeah, and so, for each, you mentioned that the, line striping, people might come and you might have things come every time you have a small, part of the contract or something, multiple checks. So for each check, how long does it take? Or is it a few minutes, or is it like very detailed and half an hour or hours?
Yeah, at least, going by now the certified wage payrolls that we receive as part of our contracts that meet prevailing wage requirements have a very prescriptive format to them. So, we see one for, our road paving contracts, and it looks, those payrolls look, almost identical to how they might look for a building project or, a park development project or something that's obligated. So I think our staff is pretty comfortable and adept at reviewing those certified wage payrolls. I don't think it takes a very, very long time to review. It's really just our township engineer or assistant township engineer, most often, making sure that we collect those, and then, just confirming that they meet what the Department of Labor defines as the appropriate prevailing wage for that job classification. So it's not entirely true that, we just are looking at a threshold and ensuring that every laborer or contractor or employee on that job is exceeding or meeting that threshold. We're actually making sure that that schedule of prevailing wages that was provided as part of the bid document that we issue is what they're paying based on that employee's classification. So it might be a different, laborer may have a different prevailing wage than, an electrician or, a plumber, or, depending on what the contract is, a different kind of employee. So we want to make sure that what they're submitting to us meets or exceeds that schedule of prevailing wages that we provide as part of the bid issue. Probably wouldn't be exactly the same for this, but, we would want to get some kind of certified payroll or pay stub that verifies that they're meeting or exceeding that $15 requirement. In other words, it's an administrative, additional administrative burden, but I can't say that it's, not doable or that it's too burdensome.
Right, and is it possible, I know I'm asking a little more, and if the board agrees, is it possible for Dave to go back at least to, 3 of them or something, the other Dave, and find out how long it takes for the companies to do that? So I'm also, want to be careful about the burden on the companies who are paying.
Well, sure. As far as, insofar as prevailing wage applies, that's sort of standard for them. These contractors are all used to these requirements, typically all used to these requirements, and so they're pretty familiar with the process. I think if we're just asking them to forward, pay stubs or complete a form, there would be maybe some additional time that you wouldn't otherwise be dealing with if you were not obligated under prevailing wage, but I don't think that would be too
right, but
too
most
burdensome.
of them have, so it wouldn't need them to create a whole new, a bookkeeping system or something, or, things like that. So that's good. I got my answer, thanks.
Okay.
I guess my thought on it is I would rather not go forward with this right now, because I think the benefit to workers from, at least based on the survey, would be fairly small number would be affected. And I do think we might discourage some companies from even putting in bids if they did perceive that there would be a burden to providing the documentation. I think that, companies that do prevailing wage, that's not a problem, but maybe companies, and which would be more likely smaller local companies that don't do that might perceive that they just don't want to get involved in that. I don't know. That's my thought on that, but no. So.
Yeah, so I would be fine tabling this and looking at it from a bigger perspective and a few more things and figuring it out.
And we don't actually have to table because we don't have the motion, so we can just
Sounds good.
set this aside for now, and then if we want to come back to it later, we can. So, does that sound okay to everyone then?
Well, I just was wondering, we could also move to write a letter to COG asking the HR committee to do a salary check for us. We could go in that direction. Write a letter to HR. Or
I
ask.
sort of agree, but I think right now, COG is feeling overwhelmed. And that was sort of one of the things I'll get to in my human resources report, but I think the staff there right now are so overwhelmed. So,
I think
Okay.
we could leave that to Patty to determine when it might be appropriate to ask for that information. I don't know that we necessarily need a letter. I think if we
Okay.
go to the committee.
Cool. Thanks.
But I do like the idea of getting something going, like that. Maybe that's not, the right time for a letter to HR, but to get something rolling so we don't let this go without any action for too long.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
ma-
think if Patty could check out through the HR committee and see if that would be, it might be something that's very easy to do. If they know that everybody's making over $15 an hour, then it'd be an easy question to answer. So Becca
Yeah.
may be able to answer it right off, yeah.
I would agree with that, and maybe just getting that question out there as we move into budget time, whenever that happens again. It'd be a good thing to have as a subset of question for each COG department.
Okay. And I can bring that up to Finance Committee Thursday too, so.
Awesome.
Okay. So I think we have some direction there. The next item is getting to new business. We have the consent agenda. We have 5 board member requests for new agenda items on there. If anyone wants to pull any of them off, that would just be for discussion of whether we want to include them later. Discussions of details would come up later, no matter what. So, does anybody want to pull any of those items off for discussion at this point? Seeing none, I take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
I'll
Laura.
second. Lisa,
Okay,
I'll
motion
second.
by Laura, second by Lisa. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next, under new business, I'm going to jump down to item 4 because I'm sure Marissa is happy to have us to listen to our stimulating discussion on township business, but she's here for specific items, so we'll move down to that, which is the suicide prevention proclamation. Dave.
Thank you. So there's a copy of the proclamation provided with your agenda that would designate September as Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month and September 10th as Suicide Awareness and Prevention Day in Ferguson Township. This has been an annual proclamation enacted by the board and has been part of a larger countywide effort by the Center County Suicide Prevention Task Force. With us tonight, as Mr. Miller indicated, is Marissa Viseri. She's the president of the Jana Marie Foundation, and I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce the proclamation.
Thank you very much. So, as mentioned, my name is Marissa Viseri, and in addition to my role at Jana Marie Foundation, I am the chairperson for the Center County Suicide Prevention Task Force. And so this is an annual proclamation that is countywide. So we hope to work with every municipality in proclaiming September as Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, and September 10th specifically as Suicide Prevention Day. That September 10th is a worldwide event that is also held in conjunction with a candle lighting ceremony. And so we are asking that you once again consider proclaiming the month and the day in Ferguson Township. This is a cause that's super important to me for multiple reasons, but 9 years ago I lost my sister Jana to suicide, and more recently I have lost my cousin to suicide as well. And what we know is that the rates of suicide continue to increase throughout our nation. Over the last couple of decades, it's increased by over 38%, and it's increased along all age groups. And it is something that does not discriminate, so it affects everybody in some kind of way. And so, I think anything that we can do as a community, especially during these times of uncertainty, during these times that have been, quite frankly, fearful or full of fear, it's really important that we help to educate what resources are available and pull the community together to remind them that even during times of isolation that we are not alone, that we can reach out to one another and really support one another in a variety of ways. We are extremely lucky here in Center County because, as evident through the Center County Suicide Prevention Task Force, there are so many different organizations and individuals who are really working toward making sure that there are no gaps in services and working on figuring out ways that we can ensure that everybody has those connections to the different services that are available. So there are, 15 to 20 different organizations each month that participate in the Center County Suicide Prevention Task Force. who come together and we look at not only the services that are available, but also where those gaps are and what we can do as individual organizations to come together and really help fill those. So in addition to this proclamation that we do annually, we are also working on hoping to transform the Red Folder project that Penn State University has done and bringing that into a community-wide effort as well. And so those folders will also be coming out in September. And that has been, once again, a collaboration with the support of Penn State University and all the different organizations that have been part of it. And will serve as another tool that organizations and groups can really use to help identify when somebody might be at risk, as well as a quick access for the amazing services that are here in terms of crisis care. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but thank you so much for considering this proclamation. Again, it means a great deal to us, and we're just so appreciative of you bringing this forward.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions?
I'll just comment that I would like to thank you. This is close to my heart, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion?
I, Laura, move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the proclamation designating the month of September to be Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month, and September 10th to be Suicide Awareness and Prevention Day in Ferguson Township.
Patty, seconds.
Okay, we have the motion and second. Is any other discussion? Dave?
Marissa, can I ask, and maybe this is a question that doesn't yet have an answer, but of course, as we recover from this pandemic or potentially prepare ourselves for a second phase, hopefully not, but given that the impact that our extended quarantine as well as the other anxiety that's kind of permeating our society as we go through this, I'm just curious, have the either mental health or human services agencies or your agency seen any change or increase or trending that we might better prepare for as we move into the coming months to either have to, kind of amplify our efforts, which are already, insufficient to address our pre-pandemic needs, let alone the new reality that we might be living in to help, people overcome the mental and emotional and physical and psychological, barriers that they may be faced with as they go into this. I'm just wondering if you have any insight to bring on that.
Yeah, I know for my own organization, so the Jana Marie Foundation, for those of you who aren't sure what we do, we tend to work with middle school and high school students in building resiliency and education about mental health and suicide prevention, as well as building just confidence and personal strength. And we have found a huge increase in need of services, especially at those age groups. There's just been a lot of changes with routine, a lot of changes within the school days, and disconnect from their friends. And that's taken a really big toll on a lot of our students. And so, we are doing what we can to help fill those gaps, and we've added in virtual summer camps. We're going to do programming throughout the school that we've never done before. And of course, one of, as with any organization right now, funding does become a harder part to find it. I do know from sitting in on some other meetings, there's been some amazing collaborations happening to help fill these needs and these gaps that we're seeing right now. There's also been a lot of telehealth that has been happening. Some groups have been able to get waivers to be able to offer telehealth and that counseling and those crisis services in a new way. And those are going really well. We're seeing that maybe some people who didn't have the transportation access before reaching out and actually getting help in a different kind of way now with some of that coming in. And so I think that's really going to also help us look toward the future of what can we do to keep some of these, to limit the barriers into help seeking. And so that will be really important as well. Of course, suicide happens for a lot of different reasons. So some of it is mental health, some of it is the stress from, loss in some sort of way, financial instability, those types of things too. And so, I think just supporting any kind of way that we can our neighbors and our friends during these times and reminding them that they're not alone and that there is hope and things will get better is really important right now.
Thank you.
Anything else? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Maureen.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me and allowing me that space to be able to share.
Okay. The next item is a public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing guidelines for outdoor sales of food and merchandise during the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this one over to Jenna to introduce.
So in order to meet new COVID-19 safety protocols for reopening, many businesses and schools are going to have to turn themselves inside out if they want to reopen in a way that provides for safer distancing between patrons. So in an effort to assist local businesses in responsibly reopening and resuming those operations as they recover from COVID-19, staff discussed at the regular Ferguson Township Planning Commission meeting June 22nd, restrictions within our ordinance that may need to be temporarily eased to enable businesses to safely and effectively operate in conjunction with implementing the governor's orders for the reopening process. The governor's office has developed rules and recommendations for safe reopening of businesses, and the proposed resolution will support and supplement those directives. As noted in the resolution, the guidelines will remain flexible throughout the term of the program, which is slated to end 30 days following the lifting of the governor's capacity restrictions. And the draft resolution is included in the agenda along with the application that businesses can fill out. And I say businesses, big umbrella. We've gotten requests from gyms, we've gotten requests from private schools, restaurants. So this resolution really encapsulates what staff has heard and what our ordinance doesn't allow as is. I know we have one business owner, Ryan Groom, here from the Central PA MMA gym. They had requested to go outdoors for some of their classes, and I know it would help them. I don't know if Ryan would like to speak. I know he has a class to teach at 8 o'clock, so he's holding on here real quick. But
I'll do my best in the 5 minutes that I have. So yeah, we're definitely stuck between a rock and a hard place. We have the ability to do classes outside. However, we're on Penn State campus, so of course Penn State wants to make sure that it's okay with the township first. But as of right now, without any abatement of rent, we're forced to do business, and because of that, we're forced to do business inside. So we've done everything that the governor has mandated. Today was technically our first day back, and this was the first that all of our classes have masks. We shut down when he said to. We reopened when we were allowed. But none of that takes into account the consideration that many, for us, it's 80% of our clientele, do not want to do any classes inside. If we're allowed to do them outside, then we're going to regain that 80% of our student base that we're missing right now. Yeah, so that's kind of where we stand.
Yeah, there is a copy of the resolution with the agenda packet. If anybody has any questions on that, I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but I think that
Yeah, I presented here.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So I think I was reading that and I So my objective was to make sure that there are masking and physical distance requirements to the extent that we can, that we can enforce. So is sort of number 5 aiming at that, or is it something else, or how do we ensure that is what my objective was.
Bringing it up, hold on. So number 5. Yeah, so number 5 goes into utilizing the parking spaces for outdoor activities. If you've traveled down to the borough, Stowers Harvest, they've taken out 3 parking spots and sort of put up concrete blocks and set out seating. So all these outdoor tables will need to be in compliance with the 6 feet requirements. So being outside is not to say you can now stack all these tables in a small little area. We're still going to be maintaining that 6 feet. Part of this application can be almost a rough rendering, how many tables you're hoping to put out. We have the requirement to maintain enough sidewalk for pedestrians to traverse. We don't really want to get into trouble with any ADA requirements. And it's going to be probably based off complaints, if anything. I mean, they will submit a application to us. We can allow for this use, and it's going to be on staff to either go around, and we have our enforcement officer, he can check in on this stuff. But if they're, we say to an applicant, you can get 5 tables outside, 6 feet between each, and we get complaints that they've packed this with 10. So we will have the ability to enforce it. It's going to be based off of the health, safety, and general welfare. So it's going to be kind of partnering up with police. Can't be blocking fire lanes, and so we're going to have all these things that we're going to have to work on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally supportive of this, but personally, I would like to see sort of an extra line there, which says that sort of, as long as the governor mandates it, the mask and physical distancing needs to be maintained. So something more explicit as an additional.
Yeah, I think the guidelines would apply. I mean, just as you were to go into a restaurant, you have to wear your mask to go in. As soon as you sit down, you can take it off. You get up to go anywhere else, you got to put it on. And we can add that in. The thing with this resolution is the governor is constantly making changes, and that's why we've not necessarily made it vague, but it's to allow for those changes that might be issued by the governor. And we can add in there that no matter what updates that are made to his orders, that this can be flexed to meet that.
I think you could just modify it really in a minor way and include what Prasenjit's talking about, I think, by, in the second whereas, Department of Health guidance for social distancing, masking, and workplace safety. Because I think specifically calling out masking is important because that's the primary thing that you're going to run into in terms of enforcement is people are ignoring masking requirements. And so if we can predicate this additional allowance on that will give us some sort of enforcement ability in terms of that. And I think that's important. I'm very supportive of this, by the way. I really want to encourage anything we can do in the township to encourage or to allow for businesses to be profitable while maintaining the governor's orders. I'm very supportive of that. But I think it's important to have masking in there.
Yeah, my position is exactly similar. Laura said it better, yeah.
We can do that.
So Dave, do you think we need a motion to add that, or is this a resolution with just?
No, resolution, we can amend, as directed. This is kind of a clarifying statement in the whereas, to reflect the masking requirements in addition to social distancing and workplace safety requirements. So we'll add that in prior to it being signed if it's adopted tonight.
Okay. So the motion's in the,
Right.
right, and include that as staff drafts the actual wording of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a few questions? More general, I think. So, so I see that outdoor seating is a main thing here, and outdoor classes, outdoor activities. So can I assume then that when one is applying for a zoning permit to like have a restaurant or a athletic facility, that it specifies whether the activity is going to be indoor or outdoor? Is that why we need to make an allowance for that? Or am I?
So the example for the private school, they have requested a tent and a massive tent to be put out there for them to have classes outside, which we don't inherently don't allow. It's more of this is temporary, is it permanent? Is it in the green, or are they taking out parking spaces? And it's just a way to control that. As for the MMA gym, they want to utilize a property that they don't own. So within here, number 1, we have added permission from the property owner where the use is going to take place. Things like that.
So in the case of a restaurant that's all indoor, if they wanted to have outdoor seating that wasn't in the parking lot, that was compliant in all ways, would they need to go through this process then? Or is it only if they need to use like parking spaces or weird spots or different things or tents or something like that?
Well, if I may, depending on the restaurant and what they have permitted, there's also liquor control laws that apply. So if it's a restaurant with a liquor license, there's very prescriptive allowances for where they're allowed to provide liquor, whether it be indoor, outdoor, or both. So, there's maybe additional considerations to give, depending on the particular establishment. But it's my understanding, and Jenna, correct me if I'm wrong here, that the applicability of this resolution for outdoor seating would be mostly if it were for whatever reason infringing on parking requirements or otherwise, encroaching in other encumbrances that are on the property. Is that correct, Jenna?
Yeah, it's
misrepresenting.
encroaching within setbacks on the property. It's
Right,
essentially
setbacks.
owners to utilize their private property, no setbacks, parking. I would hope a business owner wouldn't want to take out all of their parking so their patrons can't park and actually come to the business. So it's going to be on the business owners to really figure out what they need to function at a capacity where they're still going to be able to continue business.
Right, and much of our, to get back to focus on parking again, our parking calculations are for restaurants anyway, are based, or at least in part, on that seating area. So if a restaurant didn't have outdoor seating but was interested in providing it temporarily in response to the pandemic, with this resolution, we wouldn't require that they install more parking, for example.
So in the case where they already had enough parking to add more outdoor seating, they wouldn't have to go through this process. And I'm a little off track now, but just as a question. So does adding outdoor seating, by just the nature of it, require some sort of change of use or extension of use if you have all of the other things met?
I think oftentimes, practically, it would require at least a minor alteration plan.
I see. Okay.
So depending, because, we would want to make sure, like Jenna said, that it's not encroaching on setbacks, kicking in additional parking requirements or things like that. So, at the very, very minimum, I think it would, require a review by, the zoning administrator and determination whether a minor alteration were required as part of it.
Thanks. And is there a fee for that? Is there a fee for any of this then?
Jenna, go ahead.
We haven't discussed that. I wouldn't, but.
I don't really want to have a fee under normal circumstances. I'm like, let's have a fee, but right now, I don't want to have a fee for these things.
Yeah.
I would not support a fee either.
And I don't anticipate this consuming, enough of staff time to really justify, a fee. Maybe if this were a permanent arrangement that we were looking at, year to year, putting something in the fee schedule to recuperate our costs would be justified. But for this application, I wouldn't recommend it.
Anything else? Do we have a motion? Oh,
Can I
please,
just
second.
ask, could I just ask too, does this address, I didn't see anything in this about the yard signs that I've seen up, like we're open, or, is signage addressed at all, or have you talked
Yeah.
about it, or?
Temporary signage was one of the major things that came up at Planning Commission. And that's within number 5, signage approved by the zoning officer and the police department. We have relaxed our enforcement of signs related to businesses still being open, how they're operating, if it's pickup only. And that is also part of this application. If they're to have additional signage on the property saying these are pickup parking spaces only. And so it would be working with the zoning administrator on that as well.
Okay, sorry, I guess I should have specified off-site signage.
I mean, they're not allowed in the right of way, so if they are there, we haven't been, given the circumstances.
Okay. I don't know where to go with that.
Yeah. Maybe a clarifying question. So you're referring to temporary off-site signage that would be located outside the right-of-way, so back on a property line. Would that be permitted or allowed in a different way by this resolution? Is that?
Yeah, well, I don't think
Question.
it is, but I was wondering if that came up. I didn't see that in the planning commission discussion. I didn't watch the whole thing, so I might have missed it. So I was just wondering if they made any decision about not including that. I think I've seen some in the right of way and some not in the right of way. But I know the zoning administrator, everyone was working from home, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity for enforcement. And, I think that's a good thing. I think those signs were needed at the time to display what was open and what wasn't. I thought it was helpful. So I'm not saying that we need to get out there and enforce the signs, but I just didn't know if that was something we need to, that needs to be accommodated with this as well, off-site signage.
I think, I think temporary signage is permitted under our ordinance. I believe the restriction is 30 days, no more than twice per year. That's difficult to keep tabs on, so, I can say that we've been, generally lax in that enforcement. But the prohibition on right-of-way signage, I think, is the big, maybe one of the bigger issues, because at least observationally, I commonly see these signs, as Jenna noted, placed in the public right-of-way, which would not be, permitted or relaxed under this, as a result of this resolution, at least as what we proposed. I think that we've been understanding of that, as you pointed out, Ms. Strickland. I think we've tried to, recognize that the circumstances that we're all living in right now, we haven't maybe been as aggressive in removal of those signs when they're placed in the right-of-way to identify that businesses are indeed open or open for carry-out or whatever that may be. So I don't know whether that's a kind of a spirit of the law thing that we're moving towards, or it needs to be incorporated in the resolution, but we could work on that, or we could work on some language if the board's interested, or we can get a more specific or more direct response to the question if that doesn't answer it.
Well, if you haven't had requests up to this point or complaints about the signage, then I don't think it's necessary right now. But overall, I'm really supportive of the flexible uses, particularly of parking that isn't getting used for other things. So I'm appreciative of this.
Anything else? Do we have a motion?
I, Laura, move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution for the flexible business support, allowing businesses to implement COVID-19 safety protocols.
This is Lisa, I'll second.
Okay, the motion and a second. I guess I should say this is a public hearing, so if anyone wants to comment, we already had Ryan comment, so. So this will be a roll call vote then.
This is presented as Resolution 2020-18. Ms. Danini?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes?
Mr. Mitra?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you.
So just one clarification. So this was subject to the masking and physical distance line going into. We don't need a formal amendment for that.
No.
Okay, good, thanks.
Okay, the next item is a public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, accepting an easement agreement between Fairbrook United Methodist Church trustees, the grantor, and tax parcel 24-006B-023 in Ferguson Township, the grantee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the board has a copy of the resolution with the agenda this evening. It also includes an easement agreement between Fairbrook United Methodist Church and the township that would allow the township to maintain and manage a stormwater drainage area that's on the property of the church, 4201 West Whitehall Road. Parties have agreed through good faith negotiation to a consideration of $4,000 for the acquisition of the easement that will be paid out of the township's transportation improvement fund. And along with the agreement is an exhibit that shows that easement area. So I can pull it up on the screen if the board's interested, or if you have any questions. I will say that, historically, well, most often, easements like this are conveyed through the land development process. This is, kind of an anomaly in the sense that the property's been built out for many years, but because of issues that we're experiencing in keeping this drainage area clean and operational and functional, we have a need to acquire this easement in order to do a little more repair to it. When that's come up in the past, it's kind of taken different avenues. In some cases, the board has had an opportunity to formally adopt, as what we're doing today by resolution, that easement area. Other times it's been, kind of an administrative approval. But what I'm trying to do is standardize this process, which is why and this doesn't happen very often, but that's why it's presented as a resolution with the formal agreement and the exhibit attached to it. That would then be recorded at the County Recorder of Deeds office so that, the township formally holds that easement area. If there's any questions, I can answer them as well.
Okay, are there any questions about this motion, or about this easement? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. If anyone cares to address the board, I'm not seeing any flags, so would take a motion.
I, Laura, move the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution authorizing the chairman and secretary to execute the easement agreement between Fairbrook United Methodist Church and the township on tax parcel 24-006B-023 attached as Exhibit A.
This is Lisa, I'll second.
Okay, the motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, this would be a roll call vote.
This is presented as Resolution 2020-19. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Danini.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. Next item is the board member request, the Fairbrook Park Native Landscape Map Amendment. This was a request by Laura, so I'll ask her to present that.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Dave and Dave Modricker, for getting this together for me. So previously, the board had drafted a map that is in our agenda that would identify some low-mow areas of the park and some then like pollinator planting areas of the park. And so that policy has been in effect for, I don't know, a year now, Dave? Something like, we're going into the second full season of it. And something I observed last year and then again this year, and then also something that came up in residents' discussion of Cecil Urban Park, where we had at one point in time done a little low-mow area, but we're not doing it right now. Is that really that there should be a definition between this, like the low or no mow area, and then like a property or say a different amenity. And so I just wanted to have this map modified to accurately represent that separation between the no or low mow area and the resident's property and also other amenities. And so if you look at the map, it's a little bit out of date because the blue hatched areas that are going to be planted are not yet planted with like pollinator plantings. Right now they're just in low or no mow. So I'm going to just focus on two areas of the map where I would like to see small changes. And it's used as a communication tool between our township and Center Region Park and Rec. So that's why I really wanted to amend the map and not just say, can we just do this differently? Because we're using it to communicate with a different agency. So first we'll look at the blue hatched area that's sort of like a trapezoid or a triangle missing a top. Yes. So right now that's more like no mow or low mow, which means it's mowed once or twice a season. And I like the way CRPR mowed last year. They waited really late into the season to do their mowing. To mow the low mow area. So I think that was a good approach. But around the back edge, like where the purple line is, which is the park boundary, it should be made clear that around that top area of that triangle, we should be mowing a pathway. So like between the triangle and the blue line, there should be a pathway. I don't know. Yeah, like if you take your hand down to the bottom point of the triangle up around the top. So everything except for that lower straight thing. Yeah. So if we can amend the map to include that perimeter mowing, and then also there are two pathways that are typically mowed through there that are residents' access into the park that CRPR should be mowing, but I've seen neighbors doing that. And so I would like to formalize that we should be making sure that we have access to the park. So right now, if you go out to the park and look, you can see that there's two pathways that are mowed. So I'd like to establish them through this triangle. So I can't have the cursor. So Dave, if you,
Something like
that
this.
house, yes, there, and yes, there, exactly. So I'd like to do that so those individuals can just cut right through that. And then on the red area, if you, yep, thank you. I think this map is pretty much accurate. I think the red line that goes between the parking lot and the lower playground maybe doesn't extend far enough down to the soccer field, but I don't think that that really matters for my purposes. Where I want to focus on is the driveway that goes up through the grow zone area. There is a wooded area to the left. So that hill area was one of the reasons I wanted to start this policy, because when they would mow that hill, there would be a lot of like, I don't know, marks of the tires. It was wet there, and it was kind of like silly to mow that hill. However, there's a space between the wooded area and the hill that really should have a pathway mowed, because the way it is now, what you're having, and I sent an email of pictures, what you're having is a lot of encroachment of like invasives come down into the grassy area, and it's impossible for people to now walk along the edge of the woods there, which is an interesting space ecologically, and cool things grow there. So I wanted to modify this map so that instead of one large grow zone area, perhaps, you have to make it into two there, but so that you could note along the edge of this woods to mow like a 1 or 2 mower width, yes, pathway. They do it alongside the road, and that's great, because if you're walking alongside the road, but it's up here, Dave. So if you move toward the woods a little, yep, and then, no, the other, both sides of it actually. So basically they're doing a mowing all around the edge of that woods. Correct, yes, there. So, so the intent is to provide access, to provide access to that wooded area, and to not have that creep of invasives going down there. Even though we do mow it once a year and we would be able to control for that, it kind of just really cleans it up. So those were the only 2 modifications that I wanted to make. Any questions?
So I guess basically you're looking to have what is there or should actually be there show up on the map so that it's clear
Yes.
where the walking
The
path.
current process is kind of haphazard. Like in some places, there is currently established that marking, that mow path, and then other places it's not. So, you know, in the blue hatched area, the residents have mowed some of it, getting CRPR to take over that. And then in this red area and around the edge of that blue area, getting CRPR to start that, because it hasn't been done there. And I could probably just send Dave Modricker a map, like with a drawing on it, but like in this environment, I can't just draw it and show it to him. So, but does anybody have any question about what the intention is behind drawing those lines on the map? It's providing access to those amenities and making sure that we maintain separations between properties and amenities and the no-grow areas.
Okay. And so you'll work with Dave Modricker to come up with exactly where the things are.
Yeah. Can I move shall I move something pending? Okay. So Lara will move that the Board of Supervisors amends the Fairbrook Park below no mow row zone areas to reflect the conversation this evening, to allow for access to amenities and separation between residents' homes and amenities in no-grow areas.
I'll second with Lisa.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Are there any other discussion?
I was
Seeing
gonna
none.
say, I think this is good because this is kind of what you want to see after something's put in place, and then you look how it all evolves over a year or two. Then you say, okay, here need to tweak a little bit, and this is where this point is. And so I think this is a great step in this process.
Okay. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Next, we have the board member request, resolution on systemic racism related to ethnicity and skin tone. This was a board member request placed on the agenda by Christensen, so I'll ask him to present that.
Yeah, the summary is that I got the email that was attached to the consent agenda is a citizen who wanted us to consider a resolution based on discrimination to say that we are against discrimination based on ethnicity and skin tone and other forms of discrimination. Now, as Dave has provided in the agenda, so there is this resolution that exists with respect to Ferguson Township, that's Ferguson Township passed in 2017, and which affirms the Committee to Equity and Inclusion. So I would like to have people comment on whether that's good enough or we need something specific. I saw that there was nationality, national origin, and so on and so forth, ethnicity, which sort of, and gender identity, which covers the items that the gentleman had wanted. I had a separate of a couple more questions, comments from citizens, which said about especially taunts and so on related to our Chinese American citizens related to COVID-19 and so on and so forth. So we did pass a resolution last time, and I know that Supervisor Denini is working on another resolution sort of related to non-discrimination related to our police and so on. So I just wanted to start the discussion to see, do we need a separate resolution for anything that this does not cover, or this covers and we can move on?
Okay, is anyone, any comment on the percentage brought up?
I think that was a good synopsis.
Yeah, I think in terms of whether the everything is covered or not, one thing I would say is this: it has been 3 years since this resolution was made, and the makeup of the board has changed a lot. So if you were wanting to update it, just to pass the resolution again, start to reaffirm that, I think that would be sort of what we're doing. And if you wanted to add other specific items in there, it would be a time to do that. And then we could just essentially do the same resolution as a reaffirmation of the board's position.
Sounds good to me. I was there the first time. I liked it, so.
A little confused, I must admit. So Centuries authored something which we we passed last time.
Yep.
And so, I don't want too many resolutions with overlaps. So,
Right.
Yeah, so I wanted to see what people think, if that suffices, or do we need?
So now we have the 2017 resolution and the one we recently passed. So percentage is your question. Do you have the question? Does the board think that is enough, or we should do another?
No, what I'm asking is this, the reaffirmation of this resolution, is this resolution sufficiently different and distinct from the one that we ourselves passed? If this is distinct, then it makes sense reaffirming it. If we think that it more or less covers the same things, then not. And yeah,
What do you think, Sanjit?
I think there are substantial overlaps, but I don't see a downside in affirming this, but that's my
I agree. I agree with that.
other, if
And us?
I would agree with that. I think, whether there is overlap or not, I think it's fine to reaffirm this. The one from 2017 was, particularly related to immigration status and immigrants. And so I think it would be fine to reaffirm that and also to, restate it in a different way to be inclusive of anything maybe that wasn't representing.
So what do we want to do?
should I, well then I'll make a motion that the Board of Supervisors direct the staff to draft a resolution reaffirming the 2017 resolution and avowing systemic discrimination based on ethnicity, skin tone.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Sorry, that was Laura who seconded.
Oh, yep. Okay, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is board member request, police response report. This is a request by Persinjit, so I'll ask him to basically go over what the request is.
Yeah, so the request primarily is for information, and some of these I've already obtained from Chief Albright and Mr. Pribilka. And so the things were about the how many times officers had to discharge firearms and so on, and what type of complaints have we had and what happened to them, and what oversight board we have, and so on. So a lot of these were generated during discussions with members of the community, and information related to training of our officers, and then the number of times our officers have had to deal with mental health issues and domestic violence, how many cases where people, the other person, armed or potentially thought to have been armed, healthcare emergencies, and the idea is to look at what the status of our community, of our police department is, and to see if there are any changes that we should consider.
Okay, this is, I guess there are specific things listed in your request that you would be wanting to obtain. So first I'd like to go to Chief Albright and find out if any of those things are things that would be a problem as far as either contract or any other anything where state law would be preemptive or something.
No, there shouldn't be any issues whatsoever. I mean, there's some information I can't release names, but I could provide an overview and be able to provide that information that way. And as far as that's concerned, I mean, I have discharge of firearms. He's looking for some information, type of training, complaints that we've had in the last couple of years, and then kind of a breakdown on our calls for service. mental health, domestic violence, armed persons, medical calls, use of force stats, and arrest statistics. Some of that is information that I already present to the board. Some of it I just have to reformat in a different way.
Okay.
Can't hear you, Steve. Can't hear you, Steve.
Looks
Can't
like
hear
you're
you,
on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess my question for Crescentia would be, did you get the information that you were looking for, and are you requesting it be presented to the board as well, or is there more information that you're wanting the board to request from the chief?
So I think the overall aggregation and categorization of the types of responses, I possibly would either need that or a pointer to where I can collect those and create that. So yes, I would request that information. The chief, I must say, has been very transparent and forthright and given me a whole lot of information that I wanted. And but there might be follow-up questions related to training and so on. So it's just getting the board's permission to get the staff time to let them answer these sorts of questions going forward.
Okay.
But, so, can I ask a question about that? But just to reflect back, Chief, did you just say really that there's not a whole lot of time tied up in getting this information, or did I mishear?
No, that's correct. I mean, a lot of it is information that is already in the board packet. I mean, some of the complaints against police that Crescentia was looking for, I have already provided that to him. So I would just copy and paste what I provided to him as part of this report. Breakdown with some of the calls with armed persons, that might be a little bit more difficult because I might end up having to review each and every report. So as I said, up until I'll get a better feel when I'm able to look at the stats to see how easy I am to find it, how easy it is to find that information. But most of it is easy.
So I guess I go to Dave at this point then. Do you feel like we should have a formal request from the board for this information, or given the discussion here, is this just something that would be up to the chief to decide if there's too much of a demand on his time, or?
I would like board action, yes. I think, you know, in conjunction with this maybe written report that Chief Albright would be compiling, there would probably also be a need for a verbal, you know, report presentation, something a little bit more formal to the board. I think, you know, not only, you know, would it probably be necessary to help maybe clarify any questions, but also given the conversations that are taking place at the local, regional, state, and national level, you know, it's probably a good time for the board to get something with a little more depth, you know, with respect to some of these, not only these questions, but anything else that, you know, Chief Albright and his staff and his reports and officers might want to, you know, shed light on and have an opportunity to discuss and answer questions about. So, you know, given that, I think if it were just the, you know, the information that were provided in board reports, probably wouldn't, you know, think twice about it, but, you know, to mine the data, to scrub whatever is not public information, but also to compile and prepare a presentation for the board, I think, you know, a board directive would be warranted.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so there are members of the community, just like State College did. I think there might be some outreach value if the chief makes a presentation. There will be members who will come in or log in more accurately to hear those and perhaps be reassured.
Agreed. Sundai.
Lisa?
So I just wanted to make sure I'm clear. So the information that was requested and the information that's being requested all of that will be combined into a presentation and a report for the board.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then one thing that I guess I would be interested in seeing too with regard to the mental health responses that you make is what kind of assistance do you get from county services and their maybe contracted companies or organizations that respond on their behalf, and that kind of information on the mental health support you're being asked to offer, and then what kind of assistance you get either from the county or other municipalities.
Okay. One of the interesting things kind of that's been going on right now with the COVID is a lot of the caseworkers, the face-to-face meetings with their clients have not been occurring. So a lot of it's been by Zoom or telephone. And as I say, then what ends up happening a lot of the times is we end up going out and kind of facilitating conversations between the parties with phone calls right now.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot you could share with us and just kind of bring us up to speed on the demands you guys face and the support you receive for that kind of stuff. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so would anyone care to try to put together a motion for what we're looking for here?
There is a recommended motion in the agenda.
There is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I move that.
Oh, okay, focusing on the items described, okay. Okay. It's already summarized, that will work then. So anyone care to make the motion?
All right, I move that the Board of Supervisors direct staff to provide a report to the board focusing on the items described in my request, as well as by Ms. Strickland verbally in this meeting, and whatever else the chief wants to share with us.
Patty Sims from
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item is another board member request for Township Business Needs Survey. This is from Laura.
It is for me, but I really want to just kick it right back to Dave. I think he has some good understanding about what we want to do here.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to pick this one up. So there is the request that's included with the agenda from Ms. Danini asking that staff conduct a business needs survey that's sort of similar to what State College Borough had recently undertaken to have to develop an understanding of where the needs are of township businesses, both as they respond to the current pandemic, prepare for potentially a second wave or a resurgence in the fall, or frankly, what their long-term recovery needs might look like. I don't typically, prepare or formulate recommendations, in accordance with these board member requested items. I believe those ought to be left to the board to decide. But I think in this particular application, this is, it's a good suggestion. It'd be a good initiative, a good use of township resources. It would be, in all likelihood, reimbursable from state and federal CARES Act funding for this particular type of use. I think it would give us some really valuable insight into where we may be able to respond better to the needs of our business community, as well as to just generally get a better sense of where their issues lie and how they've fared in response to this. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to provide some meaningful data back not only to the board and the authorities and boards and commissions, but also to township staff as we kind of move in either into the next phase or to long-term recovery, so that we can be better prepared to address some of those needs. So I support this initiative and would encourage and recommend that the board move ahead with the item.
Thank you, Dave. Any discussion or questions for Dave?
I just wanted to clarify for me, like, I definitely, I'm thinking a lot about the CBICC, I don't know what they're doing in terms of reaching out to businesses, but for me, it was really important to focus on Ferguson Township businesses, so I just really wanted to see where they're at.
Okay, great. Anything else? Lisa?
I agree. I think this is a really good idea. One thing I wanted to, two things I wanted to ask to be included were maybe some questions about layoffs or furloughs that have occurred at these businesses and any kind of projections they have. You know, if Penn State goes back to remote, we will have to lay off, you know, a certain percentage or a certain number of employees. You know, they're probably thinking in those terms, so whatever information they could share about that. And as well, whatever they could share about childcare needs of their employees and how they were impacted in the spring when the schools closed, and how they foresee their fall. So if they were having, you know, a lot of call-offs from parents who had to stay home. One thing I'm concerned about is if businesses are still operating, parents have to work, but schools go back to remote, you know, we'll have a lot of childcare issues come up once again. So if we can maybe get a gauge on where they were in the spring, where they've been over the summer, I think that might be helpful. I'm not sure what the borough survey included on that, so thanks.
We can include those questions. Mr. Miller, I have an Aaron Miller in the waiting room. I'm not sure if I ought to admit him or not, but
He's finding out, he's checking in to see if we're almost done, so he knows whether or not to come over to watch Game of Thrones tonight. So.
oh, fair enough. Well, I'll allow that then. I'll let him in.
So, okay, so we have anything else on the business needs survey?
Just, you know, generally, if I may, I think just so the board is kind of familiar with the line of questioning that I'll probably be looking at with this in addition to what Ms. Strickland mentioned and what Ms. Denneny may offer as well, or any other board members for that matter. You know, I would be particularly interested in how local regulations may have impacted positively or negatively or, you know, neutrally, frankly, you know, any response or concern. So in other words, kind of, you know, looking back to the resolution that was adopted by the board earlier this evening, is that something that, you know, that is valuable, or there are things that we could be doing, you know, differently? But beyond that, are there, you know, other resources that we could provide? I think a big unknown through all this as we went into this, and, you know, lesson learned is going to be that you know, what local government's role is in response to not just a pandemic of this magnitude, which is unprecedented, but disaster recovery in general. You know, we really got to see in action, frankly, not in a good way, what you know, residents expect of us as we respond to these kinds of things. And so, you know, it'd be a good assessment or a good opportunity to assess what our role is in this, in addition to what those business needs are. I think, you know, I'll try to keep it short. You know, maybe 10 questions or so is just kind of, I think, a good practice for encouraging a high response rate. I'll get the data through our permitting software. Typically, it'd be anybody that has issued a fire permit from Central Region Code Administration is going to be a commercial use. So I'll scrub that, make sure that it's correct and that we're not missing anybody. But, you know, hopefully we'll get a good response rate from this, and we'll get some, you know, comprehensive data that we can use going forward, while also, you know, keeping it short enough that folks will want to reply. So we'll get to work on something right away if it moves ahead tonight.
Thank you very much, Dave. I just wanted to add something that is also not 100% on topic. It has to do with childcare and what you said about what our role is in supporting our residents during the pandemic. And this kind of this thought emerged in a conversation about childcare. And just my recollection was that when we revised the zoning ordinance, that we made sure to allow for both kinds of childcare based businesses in residential district, like those at-home childcare kinds of facilities. So it wouldn't be captured in this survey because this will be, I'm assuming, going to more like, businesses, and that would be residents as a whole. But just something that emerged in the conversation was just the need for more of a distributed system of childcare and how that allowing for that can be a benefit to our residents. So I just wanted to encourage everybody to keep an eye out for those kinds of things and to bring them to the board. If you see places where we can support our residents through this, if we can act on something, I'm sure we would.
Anything else? Let's go with the motion to make this a formal request. I think everybody's on board, so.
I, Laura, move that the Board of Supervisors direct staff to conduct a business needs survey with a focus on short and long-term recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Then we move on to the staff and committee reports. Executive committee, I think everything was covered at the general forum meeting, the executive committee meeting, so I don't really have a report there. Human question?
Sorry, it's my favorite thing to interject in the executive committee meeting thing where you think you don't have anything to talk about, and I'm like, but wait.
Right.
So just a question about general forum and how we're going to be enabling virtual meetings with general forum and working through that process, and I guess formalizing some policy about meetings and whatnot. I just wanted to bring up this idea of how valuable the hybrid model is of allowing supervisors to either, at their whim, at the last minute, either meet in person or remotely. And hoping that that carries over into COG, and where I understand that sometimes it's valuable in a certain committee to go do a site visit, like our CIP. It would have been great for us to be able to drive around and go to places and see things, but we adapt and we are making this list where we can go on our own, etc. So while I understand there's a value in meeting in person, I wanted to emphasize that as we move through this process with COG, that we equally value the option of the virtual meeting. And so I think that this is going to come up in a formal way. And I think that our board, based on what our own choice has been, would really support the requirement of having a virtual option in addition to in-person meetings.
Yeah, I will definitely bring that up with the executive as part of the discussion. I think at least as long as the governor's order is in effect.
Yes.
Beyond that, there's the question of whether we're allowed to do that, although Terry's latest stand on it was basically as long as you have a quorum on site, you can have other members attend remotely. So
Even in a non-emergency setting.
right. So we'll be looking into that before the governor's order expires. But he seemed to think that the way the law is written, or the precedent's been set, basically, the way the precedent's been set, as long as you have a quorum on site, you can have members attend remotely, even in normal circumstances. So,
Great.
so we'll be looking at that. Yeah.
So like clearing up both of those points would be great. So like making sure we have a virtual option during the emergency.
Right.
And then what are the rules?
Looking forward to whether we should continue
Yeah.
to do that beyond.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Okay. The next is, we've got Resources Committee.
Not much really to report other than what you saw in the agenda, just that we discussed the director for the job description for the director of SCLO Library and sort of wanted to hammer out who exactly the director reported to. Was it COG or the foundation board, et cetera? So just a little more clarity in that. The other thing that I just took away from the meeting really was that the COG staff, be it from parks or the library, have really been feeling a lot of anxiety because simple things can set people off in this COVID. So in the sort of customer service phase, that they're getting a lot of heat. You know, if somebody has maybe like fines or something, they tend to go off, you know, the deep end about how could you mess this up? And so they were just feeling a lot of stress there. And that was about it, really. So just the workload during COVID and then the tension and being a customer service phase, et cetera. And that was about it.
Any questions for Patty?
Sorry to hear that. That's a bummer. I think a lot of people are like that are facing the public are just having really terrible experiences. It's horrible.
Okay, next we have Public Service Environmental Committee.
Yeah, so I had to send multiple emails because I was, embargoed in the waiting room for 10 minutes before somebody let me in. So I missed the first. I was 4 minutes late, but then it became 10. I was in there, but anyway. So, but there were a few things that happened. I think that I should mention. So there are citizens who want the fees to be refunded for the April recycling suspension. The per person is $5.39 or something, if I remember correctly. Advanced Disposal was contacted. They said that they had some document expenses, but they also said that there were some other costs that they incurred, and they really spent more than the recycling fee, and they're not going to return any fee. So we went back and forth discussing that, and then at the end, I think most of the things that were eventually decided in this meeting was to say, the one-line thing is, let's just find more information. So I think we entrusted Eric Nuremberg and Shelley Matto to go and find out what these sort of fees are, and then try to see if Advanced Disposal would give the money back or something. So that's what will happen. And the other thing that was discussed, which is that somebody mentioned that in a small township, which is not too small, but like our size, near Erie, Advanced Disposal had offered to collect carbs or provide carbs or something, I think to collect carbs. And we decided to essentially ask them if that offer still exists for us, or we can take advantage of that. And then the committee will find out what we can do with respect to that. So this is the other thing that was discussed with respect to Advanced Disposal. Then there were a set of items that were discussed by Pam Adams. One is the climate vulnerability assessment, and essentially there will be sort of the hazard mitigation meeting that has been happening, and the climate action the Climate Action Committee, I think, and the Climate Vulnerability Assessment Team that will be meeting, and I think Dave Kabilka is part of that. And so they will, again, find out some information and get back to us. The other thing that Pam Adams talked about was a Citizens Climate Lobby presentation where she had gone to talk about the COG's plans about bringing down emissions. So I asked about what was their reaction, and it seemed that the Citizens Climate Lobby was primarily focused on, she said that was primarily focused on federal and state level things, so they were happy to see something's going on in the community, and they were pretty reasonably happy with the recommended target reductions and our plan, so there was not that much criticism or mostly support for our plan. And then there will be transportation climate action for the community on, I think that might have already either today or tomorrow or something like that. So that they'll report back on us. And that was primarily, those were the important things that were discussed in our meeting.
Thank you. Any questions for Cedric?
I have a question. Laura does. Lucinda, did you say something about, are we pursuing again something about having to use the carts and the containers for trash, for pickup? Did I hear you say something about that?
Yeah, they said, so all that was discussed, and I didn't understand that. I possibly should have asked more questions. So they said Advanced Disposal was providing cars for free to that community. Are they going to provide that for us?
Okay.
So the implications might be that, yes, that's what we would have to use.
Thanks. Thank you.
I suspect I know what the answer to whether they're going to provide it for free to us or not is, but after all the contract negotiations.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll see. I don't know. I think they really want that system in place, so we'll see.
Right. Yeah. So that's what was said, that they really want the cards. So yeah. But I don't know what we already signed. Whether we already do it, then we would. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Now we go to the manager's report.
Thank you. My report's in your packet. Just to briefly touch on the Regional Solar Power Purchasing Agreement Working Group meeting that was held on July 1st. Eric Anderson, the Finance Director, is the Township's representative on that committee. The working group approved the cost-sharing agreement for the consultant to prepare the request for proposals that would solicit firms interested in bidding on a public-private partnership for the solar power purchasing agreement. The draft of that RFP was also approved, and also taken was action to defer the release of the RFP to September as a result of the potential financial impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The 2019 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR, has been completed. We had hard copies delivered today, but the binding was subpar. So we're having them rebound for distribution to the board, but you can expect those later this week. The meetings to deliberate and discuss the preliminary requests to the 2021-2025 Capital Improvement Program budget were conducted last week. Special meetings have been announced for July 21st and July 22nd to review the draft document. You can expect copies of the Capital Improvement Program budget next Monday, or as soon as they can be provided and printed, but they're being finalized this week. And an agenda for those special meetings will be included with that hard copy as well. Non-Uniform Pension Advisory Committee that was established just over a year ago met on June 30th, and the purpose of our meeting was to discuss a strategy to review responses to a request for proposals or an RFP that was issued for pension administration services for both the Township's 457 Deferred Compensation Plan as well as the 401A pension plan offered to non-uniform employees. We had a good response. We had 8 respondents, ranging from our current provider and as well as several other firms of different sizes. And though the committee will evaluate those responses and make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for an award of an administration services for this service for the pension funds sometime in August, either the first or the second meeting is what I'm tentatively aiming for. The good news about this is of all 8 responses, including the one who currently provides these services for the township, ICMARC, all of them have been, by almost a factor of 2, reduced their fees, a reduction of fees to our plan participants. So, really it's a matter of picking the best option out of 8 good options that are going to reduce fees to the participants, provide a fund lineup that is operating and performing closer to market benchmarks and standards, and ultimately delivering a better return for employees. So I would expect a very positive outcome to come out of this exercise, and appreciate the board's support for this and direction to proceed. Parks and Recreation Committee met on June 18th. Really the main item discussed was the draft 2021-2025 capital improvement program budget for parks. Much like we did for the CIP road tour this year, we also scheduled a parks tour to be self-directed. So, we asked Parks Committee members to, tour the proposed projects on their own, depending on their schedules, and then submit any questions or comments that they may have in response to that. And then lastly, I've already talked about the virtual town hall on June 30th, that we held to discuss local and regional pandemic response efforts. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions for Dave? Laura?
Thank you. Dave, so that Giardia issue has been on my mind, the possible Giardia issue at Two Deck Park. And I just wondered if you've done any follow-up, if you know anything about that.
At this point, I've had a chance to have an email exchange with Pam Salakangas, CRPR director. She believes that, and I'd have to, probably, go through the email again to accurately represent her position on this. But I think we, meaning CRPR staff, is taking the steps they need to sanitize and clean the material that's there, that's provided by the dog park or provided by Center Region Park and Rec. It's possible, and I still have more work to do on this, that it was a privately brought water dish or whatever, communal water dish that carried the bacteria. So I'm going to look into a little bit more about what testing might look like to see if we can identify the source. Other than that one concern, I've not heard from any other park goers that their animals were affected. There's also, as I understand, the possibility of transmittal to humans. So there's been no additional cases or concerns that I've been made aware of, but my intentions are, and I just haven't had a chance to do this yet, to follow up a little bit more and see if there's some testing that we can do, or whether closures are warranted of some of the dog park while this matter is looked into a little bit further.
Thanks. That's what I was really interested in. I know there was that water bowl potential issue, but when I read up on it, I always thought it was contaminant of just water, but apparently soil as well, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. So, I really think that the potential for spreading and costing a lot of residents money if there actually is a Giardia problem in that soil would be something we'd really want to know about. So I know it's kind of like one of those spaces in between, whose job is it to manage the dog park, CRPR or ours? So it's kind of like an important thing. So I'm glad you're taking hold of it, because I think somebody has to, and it should probably be us to try to get some testing done there. And
yeah, I agree.
To learn about remediation.
Yeah, I think we can do some testing and see if there's any risks or hazards that exist out there. There's a possibility that was, sourced completely separate from the dog park, and so, I guess
Yep.
through process of elimination, we can try to see if there's something that we ought to be more concerned about, so I'll look into that further.
Thanks, that would be great, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for Dave? Okay, next is the Public Works Director's report is attached. Did you have anything you wanted to highlight, Dave, or?
No, nothing particular, other than to say that the Public Works Maintenance Facility project is rolling right along. We've been very fortunate to not have to contend with many rain delays or other issues that have come up with respect to that contract. Dave Modricker and I and Eric Enderson, the Finance Director, are closely keeping an eye on budget for this and monitoring any change orders, and so far the news has been very good. We've had a couple of site issues come up, sinkholes and the like, but thus far we've been able to manage some of those as they've come in at low or no cost to the overall contract, so it's been generally positive news. Other than that, if there's any specific questions on his report, I can either respond to them if I'm able, or I can chase down answers when Dave gets back from vacation next week.
Laura?
Thank you. I was going to mention this in communications to board time, but I think it's better here. So I did get some feedback from a farming family in West Ferguson about the stormwater fee study phase 2, and just that they're concerned that because of the pandemic and a lot of the virtual based interactions that we're having, that maybe not all voices would be heard. And so I let them know that I would be willing to advocate for something in person. So I know that we have a certain budget and that we have certain things planned, but I guess it's a really kind of an important thing, and I just want to make sure that we have enough time and space for that dialogue to happen. So I just thought I'd bring that up. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, and then we have Planning and Zoning Director's report.
We may have lost Jenna.
She's like, well, Jenna.
I don't see her in the room, and I didn't have much of a chance to review her report, but I will peruse it. See what of note. As the board is well aware, we had our third round of mediation for the Pine Hall land use appeal, and we had some discussion about that earlier this evening, and we'll continue to move ahead with that in the coming weeks. We are prepared to present the amended chicken and duck ordinance with some comments that we've incorporated from the Planning Commission as well as other staff and stakeholders. A few notes on upcoming hearings on proposed variances that are scheduled for later this month, and that appears to be it. So I apologize for the convoluted report there, but just having a chance to look at it now, I don't know what happened to Jenna.
Okay. Laura?
Thanks, that was great. So the duck and chicken ordinance is coming back to us next, is that what you said?
I believe that's the case. I want to double check that with Jenna to see if her plans are to send that back to Planning Commission first, or if it's ready to come back in front of the board. I don't think there was a lot of details that remained to be resolved, so I don't foresee any delay, but let me check on that and see if she wants to send it back to Planning Commission, or if there's another round of review that needs to take place.
Thanks. And then, so one follow-up on that, and then one other thing. So on that, you and I had an email exchange about where the duck and chicken ordinance applies and
Right.
where it doesn't. And so just as a reminder, when it comes back to us, just that as a topic for review and discussion.
Yep.
And then the other thing is the sign ordinance. Where is that in the process? Like, did it have to go to CRPC and that kind of thing, or?
No, there's no obligation that it goes to any other agencies, frankly, other than the Board of Supervisors. It is a standalone ordinance. It's not incorporated in our zoning regulations, so there's nothing specifically, prescribed as far as how that ordinance gets reviewed or developed. I think we've placed it in front of the Planning Commission. They've had some initial review comments. Last I talked about this with the planning director. They were being, incorporated into the draft and, we were massaging some of the language to be a little bit more consistent or a little more specific about things like nonconformities and other issues that may arise, addressing the other pain points that we've identified in the ordinance. So I think it's moving along pretty quickly. I don't have an exact timeline when the board might have an opportunity to see it again, but I don't believe there's much work yet to be done on that.
But since it already went to the planning commission, the next place it comes is to us, right?
Well, typically, yes, if there's the planning commission reviews it, if they've had their concerns, incorporated, then it would come back to the Board of Supervisors for your final review and authorization for public hearing. If there are unresolved comments or concerns or questions that the planning commission would like to have an opportunity to hear it again or to review it again or to maybe see some of those changes and the verbiage that was included to address some of their concerns, then it's not uncommon for that to go back in front of the planning commission for a second time and a second review prior to them making their recommendation for approval or disapproval to the Board of Supervisors. So, again, I'll defer to Jenna and I'll follow up with the board on where exactly that is in that review process. I'm not entirely sure whether it's going back in front of the planning commission or where its next stop is to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, thanks.
Next item is communications to the board. Anyone wants to share there?
Well, I had another communication about a smoke issue, like a unwanted smoke in your area kind of issue. Some feedback on the fireworks. I was gonna ask the chief how he thought the 4th went with the distributed fireworks locations.
We didn't have any problems. We only had one complaint. Person was upset that the fireworks. But outside of that, okay.
Thanks.
And we come to calendar items. We have the virtual coffee and conversation on July 10th at 8 a.m.
Yes, that is our annual coffee and conversation where we invite state elected officials to join us. So we did receive confirmation from, I believe, Representative Benninghoff and Representative Irvin that they'll be in attendance, as well as a representative of Senator Corman's office. And I believe I heard this morning from Faith Norris, our administrative assistant, that Congressman Fred Keller is also going to be in attendance. So I guess for the first time we'll have a U.S. congressman in attendance at one of our coffee and conversations. So forward to that.
See you guys Friday morning then.
Virtually.
Right.
Bring your own coffee.
Can do.
Okay. Looks like the next item is adjournment. Anyone cares to make a motion? Or
So
just
moved.
say-
I move.
We're adjourned.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.